If you're coming out of a toxic relationship, particularly with someone who has either borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, or even just strong narcissistic tendencies, there's a good chance that you probably sustained some, if not a lot, of emotional and or mental abuse. So the question is, should you forgive your ex for that abuse? This is Shana, just a human in Los Angeles, here to help you pick up the pieces from your breakup. So let me be clear. When I say forgive, I don't mean that you need to let that go as if it didn't happen. And I certainly do not mean that you need to take your ex back. In fact, I'll argue that if you had an abusive ex, you definitely should not take them back. But when I say forgive, I mean really, should you forgive them in your heart? Or should you hold against them the abuse that you had to take? Maybe relentlessly, maybe just every once in a while. Is that forgivable? Or is that something that you should hold on to and feel that anger and feel that resentment? Because, quite frankly, perhaps they deserve it. If you watch my channel regularly, you'll know my answer is yes. You should forgive your borderline or narcissistic ex for their behaviors. But it's not just as simple as have the love in your heart, let go of the hate. Those things are true because hatred, resentment, they can literally eat you up from the inside out and make you sick. Sick in your brain and sick in your body. So on that level, yes. The more that you can let go of anger and resentment, the healthier you're gonna be in your breakup recovery, period. But when you're speaking specifically about someone with a personality disorder, such as borderline personality disorder, one thing you need to keep in mind, or that I recommend you keep in mind, is that these people's brains function differently than our brains. And so their emotional dysregulation is something absolutely beyond their control. So let's reframe the question. Can I forgive someone for behaviors that are beyond their control? I guess that I was lucky that I was in a relationship with a BPD who was in therapy and was very, very aware of his behaviors and how out of his control they really were. Why was I lucky? Because he could actually articulate to me what was going on in his brain. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what he said it felt like to be struggling with literally like his inner demons, to be tormented inside and to have his brain feel completely out of his own control. One thing that sticks out in my mind so much, and quite honestly, it hurts my heart to think about, was that he would like go like this and he would tell me, he's like, it's in here. Like my brain, it just won't let go. It won't let me go. And I could just, the frustration was so painful. It was so palpable that when he could put it in words and talk about his own struggle with his own mind, I could see instantly that even though he would lose control, and he would lose control a lot, it wasn't because he didn't want control. It wasn't because he didn't want to behave in a better or more respectful and loving way towards me. It was that his brain would not stop. From my end, what it looked like and felt like was non-stop rage. I didn't live with him, but he would call 3-4 times a day and sometimes just scream for hours. And I would just sit there and listen. And if I said anything or if I dared to ask a question, it would come back at me. And now I would be the target. So it was easier for me to just sit and listen to him rage and listen to him vent. And from my end, it was like my heart, it was dying. Because wherein I want to love my partner, I want my partner to love me back. Instead, I was spending hour upon hour upon hour, day after day after day, as the recipient of his absolute, utter, and uncontrolled rage. Now, I use the word rage very specifically because it's different than anger, okay? The rage is extreme, it is explosive, and it is relentless. Being on the receiving end of it hurts. My ex was very aware of how his behaviors affected me. And though he couldn't control himself, much like an alcoholic, pretty much every morning or sometimes late at night before bed, I would receive a heartfelt apology. And there are apologies that aren't really apologies, and then there are heartfelt apologies saying, I know what I'm doing, I know how it's affecting you, and I'm sorry. So those were the apologies that were coming from my borderline ex. Now, again, it could be because he was in therapy. He had more self-awareness than the average bear. But at the same time, the self-awareness did not excuse the behavior. So when I talk about forgiving, I'm not talking about excusing, okay? Whether you can control your rage or you can't control your rage, there is never, as in ever, a valid excuse for abusing anyone, whether that's physically, mentally, sexually, or emotionally. It is never okay. But that doesn't mean that it can never be forgiven. I literally cannot emphasize this enough. Just because your borderline ex could not control his or her abusive behaviors does not mean that the abuse was okay. But maybe, just maybe, if you could understand that it's their brain that is malfunctioning. It is their brain that will not allow them to properly control their emotions. It is their brain that is sending them into these rages. Maybe if you can get to that understanding, you can get to a point where you could have empathy for their struggle, and that you don't have to take them back. You don't have to say the abuse is or was okay, because it isn't and it wasn't. But maybe you can at least forgive. I personally have chosen to unequivocally forgive my borderline ex for his behaviors. I know that he is working on himself right now. I know that he is trying. But more than anything, I know that he's tortured. And to hear about that torture, and as an empath, to feel his torture is for me. And so how can I be angry at somebody who's working so hard to fight his demons? It doesn't mean that there's a place left in my life for him to exist. But it does mean there's a place for him in my heart where I can forgive.